She was underestimated, laughed at, even insulted. But in seconds she flipped the script, and no one saw it coming. The doors of the boutique swung open with a soft chime. Inside, chandeliers spilled warm golden light over rows of glittering gowns and glass cases that sparkled with jewelry. It was the kind of place where silence was expensive, and every step across the marble floor was measured. And yet, when she walked in, tall, elegant, dressed in a simple but tasteful outfit, the atmosphere shifted. Heads turned, eyes narrowed. The clerks behind the counter shared a look, then smirked. They didn't recognize her face, didn't know her name. All they saw was a young black woman entering their luxury boutique. She moved with quiet confidence, running her hand across a display of silk dresses. "Excuse me," she said softly, her voice calm but clear. "Could I see this one in my size?" The clerk barely looked up from her phone. "That's the newest piece in the collection," she said flatly. "It's very expensive." The other clerk, arranging scarves nearby, chuckled under her breath. "Maybe she just wants to look, for fun." Their laughter was sharp, cutting, echoing in the wide open space. Customers nearby pretended not to notice, but their sideways glances made the sting sharper. The young woman's cheeks grew warm, though her posture remained straight. "I asked if you had my size," she repeated, steady, refusing to let her voice crack. This time the clerk raised an eyebrow, scanning her from head to toe. "Are you sure you can afford it?" she asked loudly, making sure others could hear. "This isn't a store for window shoppers." The second clerk smirked, adding, "Maybe the clearance racks down the street would be a better fit." Both burst into quiet giggles, their hands covering their mouths as if her presence was a joke. The woman froze for a moment, letting their words hang in the air. Around her the boutique seemed to close in, every glittering jewel and polished seur, face turning into a mirror of mockery. She felt the humiliation burn deep, not just for herself, but for every time she had seen her father endure similar treatment. But instead of snapping back, she breathed deeply. She straightened her shoulders, and with a quiet dignity, she set the dress back on its stand. "I see," she said. Her tone was soft, but her eyes locked on theirs with piercing intensity. "Thank you for your service." She turned and walked slowly toward the door. Behind her the clerks exchanged mocking whispers. One even let out a small laugh, calling after her, "Better luck next time, sweetheart." The sound of their laughter trailed her steps like a shadow. She pushed open the boutique's heavy doors, letting them close with a quiet click. Outside the air was cool, the city alive with movement and noise. She paused on the sidewalk, staring at her reflection in the boutique's tall glass windows. For a moment, the pain was raw. She had been dismissed, belittled, treated as if she didn't belong. But then, her expression shifted. The hurt melted into something sharper. A flicker of determination lit her eyes. The clerks inside thought they had won. They thought they had embarrassed her, pushed her out, stripped her of dignity. What they didn't know was the truth. They had just mocked the daughter of one of the most powerful CEOs in the country, a man whose empire stretched across industries, whose name carried weight in every boardroom. And she herself was not just his daughter, she was his heir. She turned away from the boutique window, lips curling into the faintest of smiles. They thought they had laughed her out of the store. But in reality, they had just handed her the perfect reason to show them exactly who she was. And as she walked down the street, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, glanced at the name on the screen, and saw that her smile deepened. Because this was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning. The city lights glittered outside her penthouse window, casting long reflections across the polished glass floor. She sat silently on the edge of a leather armchair, her shopping bag empty, her mind heavy with the sting of what had just happened. Most people who looked at her that day had seen only what they wanted to see. A young black woman who didn't belong in a boutique of gold chandeliers and crystal mirrors. But what they didn't see was the truth, the weight of the empire behind her name. Her father's portrait hung above the fireplace. His stern eyes seemed to meet hers even now, reminding her of the lessons he'd hammered into her since childhood. She could still hear his voice, steady, powerful, unforgettable. Dignity first, daughter. Always dignity. Let them laugh. Let them underestimate you. That's when power speaks the loudest. She closed her eyes, remembering the many times she had watched him walk into rooms where no one believed in him, where doors had been slammed before he even knocked. And yet, he never shouted, never begged. He simply worked harder, built higher, and proved every single one of them wrong. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. They thought she couldn't afford a dress, if only they knew the truth, that her father didn't just shop in those boutiques. He bought the real estate that housed them. On the table beside her sat a stack of business magazines. Every cover bore the same name, her father's. Some called him ruthless, others visionary. But to her, he was simply Dad, the man who taught her to ride a bike, the man who told her bedtime stories about resilience instead of fairy tales. She picked up one of the magazines, tracing the bold headline with her finger. It spoke of mergers, takeovers, billions moved with the flick of a pen. She thought back to when he told her, half smiling, "One day, people won't just know my name. They'll know of yours too." Her jaw tightened as she remembered the clerk's smirks. Their words echoed cruelly in her ears. "Are you sure you can afford it?" She replayed the moment she turned to leave, each laugh trailing her like an arrow to the back. It hurt, yes, but it also awakened something deeper. A fire. A reminder that carrying her father's name was not a shield to hide behind. It was a weapon, one she had to learn to wield. She rose from her chair and walked toward the window, gazing at the skyline. From here, the city looked small. Towers of glass and steel stood proudly, yet fragile in her eyes, all of them, in some way, connected to her father's empire. And one day, they would be hers to protect and to control. Her reflection in the glass stared back at her. She whispered under her breath, almost as if speaking to the clerks who had mocked her, "You laughed at the wrong woman." The words hung in the air, charged with promise. She wasn't going to scream. She wasn't going to argue. She was going to do what her father always did. Let actions speak louder than wounds. Her phone vibrated again on the table, the same name glowing across the screen. Dad. For a moment, she hesitated, her heart pounding. Should she tell him what happened? Should she admit the humiliation she felt, standing powerless in that boutique? But she remembered his lesson. Vulnerability isn't weakness. It's fuel. She picked up the phone, her hand steady now. "Hi, Dad," she said softly, her voice calm, but her eyes glinting with new resolve. "I need to talk to you about something." The silence that followed was not empty. It was heavy, charged with the promise of what came next. Because she wasn't just going to heal from this insult. She was going to turn it into power. And when the boutique clerks saw her again, they would finally learn the name they chose to ignore. Her father's voice echoed through her memory, but with it came images, scenes burned into her mind from the stories he once told her. Stories that were not fairy tales, but battle scars. She remembered being a little girl, sitting cross-legged on his study floor while he leaned back in his chair, recounting the early days. "They didn't just close doors on me," he once said, his tone calm but edged with steel. "They slammed them in my face." The memory blurred, and in her mind she saw it unfold. A younger version of her father, suit a little too worn, tie slightly frayed, walking into a boardroom. His proposal was tight, his numbers flawless, yet Before he even spoke, the men across the table exchanged glances. One muttered under his breath, just loud enough to be heard. Ambitious, for someone like him. They laughed. Not the laughter of humour, but of dismissal. Her father kept speaking, his voice steady, eyes unshaken. But when the meeting ended, they didn't shake his hand. They simply pushed his folder back across the table and told him, "We'll pass." The flashback shifted again. Another scene, another wound. He stood in the rain outside a bank, rejection letter in his hand. The words were polite, yet cruel. "We regret to inform you that your application cannot be approved at this time." Behind the phrasing, her father knew the truth. He wasn't denied because his plan was weak. He was denied because his skin wasn't the right color. The young woman clenched her fists now, standing at her window, replaying those injustices. Her father had told her once, with a rare edge of bitterness, "I was never just competing with numbers or business plans. I was competing with history, centuries of being told we weren't enough." But the memory didn't stop there. She also remembered the fire in his eyes when he added, "And that's why I refused to quit." Images flickered like a reel of film. Her father selling goods out of the back of a van, shaking hands with customers in parking lots, slowly turning small deals into bigger ones. Nights where he came home exhausted, but still smiled at her mother, whispering, "One day they'll see." And then, the breakthroughs. She remembered the first time she visited his office as a child, sitting in a leather chair far too big for her. The building wasn't large then, but to her it felt like a palace. He walked in with papers in his hand, triumphant. "We did it," he told his wife. "We signed the deal. We're growing." Step by step, rejection turned to respect. The same men who once mocked him were suddenly trying to partner with him. And yet, he never forgot those boardrooms, those smirks, those doors slammed in his face. The young woman breathed deeply, her father's lessons weaving together in her mind. Every cruel laugh she endured in that boutique was just a faint echo of what he had endured for decades. And if he could rise above it, if he could build an empire out of the ashes of mockery, then so could she. She whispered the words he once told her, almost as if to remind herself, "Power is best revealed when people underestimate you." Her father's fire was now her own. The humiliation from the boutique no longer felt like weakness. It felt like a spark, a challenge, a reason to stand taller. She picked up her phone again, gripping it with renewed strength. This wasn't just about a dress. This was about legacy, about making sure the world remembered what her father had fought for and what she was ready to protect. And with that thought, she pressed her father's number. The call began to ring, because now it was time for the next move. Her hand hovered over the phone, her reflection staring back from the black screen. The boutique's laughter still echoed in her ears, but now it no longer burned. It sharpened. She inhaled slowly, steadying her breath, then pressed the call button. The line rang once, twice, and then his voice answered. Deep, measured, the kind of voice that could silence a room without raising its volume. "Daughter," he said simply, "what's on your mind?" She hesitated for only a moment, then let the truth spill. "I went into a boutique today. I wanted to buy a dress." Her words slowed, weighted with emotion. "They laughed at me, Dad. They mocked me in front of strangers. They didn't see me. They only saw what they wanted to believe I was." On the other end, silence. A silence so heavy she could feel the air around her thicken. Then his breath. Calm, but edged with restrained anger. "They laughed at you?" His voice dropped lower, almost a growl. The same people who pay rent in buildings owned by our company dared to laugh. She closed her eyes, hearing the rumble beneath his composure. Yes, but I didn't argue. I walked out. Another silence. Then a sound, fingers tapping against his desk, a rhythm she knew meant he was thinking, calculating. Finally his voice came, low and deliberate. Good. You held your dignity. That is what I taught you. She nodded, though he couldn't see her. But now, he continued, his tone shifting, steel threading through each word. It is time to act. They mistook you for someone powerless. They must learn whose daughter they laughed at. Her pulse quickened. What do you want me to do? He leaned forward on the other side of the line, his voice almost a whisper, but carrying the weight of a command. You know what to do. Show them. Not with anger, not with words, with power. Her grip on the phone tightened. Power, she repeated softly, almost to herself. Yes, he said firmly. Anyone can shout back. But true power is silent. It is undeniable. It makes them bow without a word. They disrespected you. Now they will answer to you. Her father's words lit the spark already burning inside her into full flame. The humiliation she once felt transformed in that moment into clarity. She straightened, her voice calm but resolute. Then I'll show them, Dad. I'll remind them who they chose to laugh at. A brief pause, and then she heard it. A smile in his voice. That's my daughter. The line went quiet for a second time, but this silence was different. It was filled not with anger or pain, but with purpose. She set the phone down gently, her decision made. The plan was no longer forming. It was already alive. Because the next time she stepped into that boutique, she wouldn't walk in as just a customer. She would walk in as their owner. Morning sunlight poured through the glass walls of the skyscraper's top floor, glinting off chrome fixtures and polished marble tables. The boardroom was vast, but its silence carried weight, the kind of silence where billion-dollar decisions were made. She walked in with her head high, heels tapping against the floor like a steady drumbeat. At the end of the long table sat her father, papers spread neatly before him. His presence alone commanded authority, yet when his eyes met hers, they softened. "You're ready?" he asked. She nodded. "More than ready." He gestured for her to sit. "Then let's begin." A team of advisors and attorneys entered, their briefcases snapping open, laptops flickering to life. Spreadsheets, contracts, and property listings flashed on the large screen at the end of the room. She recognized one immediately, the boutique's address projected in bold letters. Her father tapped the screen with a pen. "This," he said, "is where they made their mistake." Her eyes narrowed as the image of the boutique appeared, its sparkling chandeliers and gleaming windows, the same ones that had reflected her humiliation just a day ago. The lead attorney spoke, his tone crisp and professional. "The building housing the boutique is currently on the market. The owners are in financial distress. With your family's resources, acquiring it would be straightforward." A ripple of electricity ran through her veins. Fate had delivered the opportunity directly into her hands. Her father leaned closer, his voice low but resonant. "This is not just real estate. This is a statement. You walked out of their store as a customer. You'll walk back in as their landlord." She let the words sink in, the vision unfolding in her mind. Yesterday, laughter chased her out the door. Tomorrow, silence would bow before her authority. One advisor cleared his throat. "Of course, we'll need signatures, authorization, and a capital transfer. But with your approval, we can finalize within hours." Her father turned to her, sliding the contract across the table. The thick packet of papers landed in front of her with a decisive weight. "This decision," he said, "is yours." Her hand hovered over the pen. For a moment she thought back to the clerk's mocking voices. "Are you sure you can afford it?" Their words replayed, but instead of stinging, they fueled her resolve. She picked up the pen. "They asked me if I could afford a dress," she said coldly. "I think I'll buy the roof over their heads instead." The attorneys exchanged glances, some concealing smiles. Even they could feel the magnitude of what was unfolding. Her father watched, pride glowing faintly in his eyes as she signed her name, each stroke of ink transforming humiliation into power. With one signature, the building was hers. When she placed the pen down, the room seemed to shift. It was done. She was no longer the girl they laughed out of a boutique. She was their employer, their owner, their reality. Her father broke the silence. "Do you feel it?" She looked. "Up to what?" "The shift," he said. "The moment when you stop being underestimated and start being undeniable." She smiled faintly, the weight of the contract still beneath her hand. "Yes," she whispered. "I feel it." The advisors began collecting the documents, already moving on to the logistics, legal transfers, notifications, and staff management. But she wasn't listening. Her thoughts were already at the boutique, picturing the looks on their faces when they realized who now controlled their future. Her father stood, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Tomorrow, you'll walk back into that store. Not for revenge, but for justice. And you will show them who they laughed at." She met his gaze, her voice steady. "I'm ready." And with that, the plan was set. The papers were signed. The power was hers. The next step was not business. It was personal. The boutique doors swung open once again. The same delicate chime echoed through the air, but this time it sounded like the start of a symphony. She stepped inside slowly, her heels clicking against the marble floor. Today she wasn't in casual attire. She wore a tailored black dress, subtle but commanding, paired with understated pearls and a coat draped lightly over her shoulders. Nothing flashy, yet everything about her presence demanded attention. The clerks noticed her instantly. Their smirks returned, sharp and condescending. One leaned toward the other, whispering just loud enough. "Well, well. Look who decided to come back." The second clerk laughed under her breath. "Guess she still thinks she belongs here." But unlike yesterday, the young woman did not flinch. Her face was calm, almost serene. She walked with measured grace, as if she owned every inch of polished marble beneath her, because now she did. She approached the counter. The same clerk who had mocked her before folded her arms, preparing another saluting remark. "Didn't we tell you yesterday?" she sneered. "This isn't the place for—" The young woman raised her hand gently, silencing her. Her voice, though quiet, carried a weight that made the words fall heavy. "Gather, everyone," she said. The clerk blinked, confused. "Excuse me?" "Everyone," she repeated firmly. "Every employee. Right here. Now." For a moment, the boutique fell into stunned silence. The second clerk let out a scoff, shaking her head. "Oh, this is rich. You think you can order us around?" But then she saw the look in the woman's eyes. It wasn't pleading. It wasn't desperate. It was absolute. Something in that calm gaze made her hesitate. Reluctantly, the clerks muttered under their breath and began calling the others. Within minutes, staff trickled in, sales associates, floor managers, even the boutique supervisor. They gathered near the counter, whispering amongst themselves, some clearly irritated at the interruption. The young woman stood before them, perfectly still. Her silence stretched, pulling tension tight in the room. Finally she spoke. "Yesterday," she began softly, "I came here as a customer." The clerks exchanged amused glances, some already rolling their eyes. "And yesterday," she continued, her voice steady, "you laughed at me, mocked me, told me I didn't belong." The room shifted. A few employees fidgeted uncomfortably, recognizing her face now, recalling their own words from just a day ago. She stepped closer, lowering her voice but sharpening its edge. "You thought I was beneath you. You thought I couldn't afford to be here." The supervisor scoffed. "Look, if this is about yesterday, maybe you misunderstood." Her eyes locked on his, silencing him mid-sentence. "No," she said firmly. "I didn't misunderstand. I remember every word." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Their arrogance began to crack, unease creeping in. She straightened, her presence filling the boutique. "That's why I called you here. Because today, I am not standing here appeased. It's a customer." The staff exchanged confused glances. Whispers rippled through the group. Her lips curved into the faintest smile, one that held more power than any raised voice could. "Today, I stand here as your new owner." The words struck like thunder. Gasps filled the room, jaws dropped. The clerks who had mocked her yesterday stared at her in disbelief, their confidence evaporating in an instant. She let the moment linger, watching realization wash over them like a storm. Their laughter was gone, their arrogance shattered. All that remained was fear, and the dawning truth. And as their eyes darted nervously, waiting for her next words, she simply stood tall, composed, and silent. Because she knew the true reveal had only just begun. The room was frozen. A boutique once filled with polished smiles and soft music now stood silent, every employee staring at her as though the walls had shifted around them. Her words still echoed. "Today, I stand here as your new owner." The silence cracked first with a laugh, nervous, hollow. One of the clerks, the same one who had mocked her most, shook her head. "You're joking, right? Some prank?" But her calm expression didn't waver. She slipped a crisp document from her bag, unfolded it with care and laid it on the counter. The company letterhead glimmered in the light. Signatures, seals, ownership. "This," she said, her tone sharp as glass, "is not a joke." The papers spoke louder than she ever could. Gasps rippled through the staff. The boutique supervisor leaned in, scanning the contract, and his face drained of color. "No, this can't be," he muttered. Her eyes locked on him. "Oh, it can. Because yesterday you laughed at me. Today, you answer to me." The weight of her words pressed down on the room. Employees shifted nervously, the arrogance that once filled their posture melting into unease. She stepped forward, her voice steady and deliberate. "Do you know who my father is?" No one answered. Their silence was answer enough. "My father built one of the largest corporations in this city," she continued. "He faced rejection, discrimination, and mockery, just like what I faced here yesterday. But he rose above it. He taught me that dignity is strength, and that power is revealed when people underestimate you." She let her gaze sweep across them, pausing on the clerks who had smirked at her humiliation. "And you underestimated me." One of them swallowed hard. "Listen, we didn't mean—" She cut him off with a sharp glance. "You didn't mean. You meant every word. You judged me not by who I was, but by who you assumed I couldn't be." The staff shifted uncomfortably. Some looked down at the floor, ashamed. Others tried to mask their panic. She straightened, her voice ringing with finality. "This boutique, this building, it belongs to me now. And with ownership comes decisions. So here's mine." The room held its breath. "You're all fired." The words landed like a hammer, shattering what little pride they had left. Gasps, protests, frantic whispers filled the air. What? No, please. You can't be serious. We need these jobs. Their voices overlapped, desperation spilling into the air. The same mouths that once laughed at her now begged for mercy. But she remained unmoved, her expression carved in stone. When I walked in yesterday, you had the power to show kindness. Instead, you chose cruelty. Today I have the power to decide your future, and I choose justice. The supervisor stepped forward, his voice trembling. Miss, please, we were wrong. Give us another chance. She tilted her head slightly, studying him. Another chance? Did you give me one yesterday? Or did you dismiss me before I could even finish my sentence? He had no answer. Her words cut through the silence one last time. The difference between you and me is simple. You used your power to humiliate. I'll use mine to transform. For a long moment, no one spoke. The staff stood in stunned defiant. The realization of their downfall heavy in the air. Finally she turned, her coat sweeping behind her. She walked toward the doors with the same calm, deliberate steps she had entered with. At the threshold, she paused and looked back, her voice low but powerful. Collect your things. Security will escort you out. And then she left, leaving behind the ruins of arrogance and the silence of shattered pride. Because tomorrow, this boutique would no longer be a place of exclusion. It would stand as proof that dignity always outlasts cruelty. And for her, the true transformation was only just beginning. By the next morning, her story was no longer confined to the boutique's 4 glossy walls. It was everywhere. Headlines blared across news sites and social media. Heiress buys boutique after discrimination scandal. Clips of the stunned employees being escorted out played on loop. Hashtags trended worldwide, sparking a storm of opinions. Some voices criticized her. She was too harsh, they argued. Firing them all was revenge, not justice. But others rose in defense. No, they countered. It was accountability. For once, arrogance met consequence. The city buzzed with debate. Cafes, offices, and street corners echoed with conversations about class, race, power, and respect. Some called her ruthless, others called her brave. But no one could deny this. She had forced the world to pay attention. Meanwhile, she remained calm, almost detached, watching the whirlwind from her office. The decision had been made. The past was already behind her. Now came the future. At dawn, she returned to the boutique. This time, it was not for confrontation, but for creation. The building, once tainted with mockery, would be reborn. She walked through the empty halls, the echoes of laughter and cruelty replaced with silence. Yet she did not see ruins. She saw possibility. 2. Turning to her assistant, she spoke firmly. We're not just reopening this boutique. We're rewriting its purpose. I want a staff that reflects the world we actually live in. Diverse, talented, and respectful. Applications poured in. And for once, resumes weren't filtered by assumptions about names, skin color, or accents. She interviewed each candidate herself, listening not just to their skills, but to their stories. A single mother, overlooked for years because of her background. A young immigrant, told he didn't fit the brand. A fashion student, dismissed for not having the look. To all of them, she offered a chance. You belong here, she said softly, because talent has no uniform face. Within weeks, the boutique transformed. Bright new faces welcomed customers with warmth. The racks displayed not just luxury, but vision. Designs curated to celebrate inclusivity and creativity. The air itself seemed lighter, no longer heavy with arrogance. Word spread quickly. People who once avoided the store now flocked to it, curious to see the change. And when they stepped inside, they were greeted not with judgment, but with dignity. Even those who had once doubted her found themselves silenced. Reporters soon asked her, "Was this revenge?" Her reply was calm, deliberate. "No, revenge is small. This was about setting a standard. Respect is not optional in business. It is the foundation." Her words struck a chord, echoing far beyond the boutique's glass walls. Universities discussed it in classrooms. Activists cited it in rallies. Even rival business owners took note. This young woman had turned humiliation into a statement and a single building into a movement. Yet she carried herself without boastfulness. She never gloated over the downfall of those who mocked her. Their lesson had already been written in their own actions. Her focus was only forward. One evening, as the boutique doors closed after its grand reopening, she stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker. Her father's words echoed in her heart. "Power is best revealed when people underestimate you." She smiled faintly, realizing that this was no longer just about her. This was about everyone who had ever been dismissed, laughed at, or pushed aside. The boutique was no longer just a store, it was a symbol. And though the city's chatter would eventually move on, one truth remained. She had rewritten the story. From laughter to respect, from rejection to leadership, from silence to power. But her journey was only beginning. The boutique lights had dimmed, the city outside alive with its usual rhythm. Yet within the quiet sanctuary of their family's penthouse, a different kind of rhythm unfolded, one of reflection, legacy, and love. She sat across from her father at the long mahogany table. No boardroom this time, no shareholders, no assistants, just father and daughter, the man who had built an empire, and the young woman proving she was ready to carry it forward. Her father studied her in silence for a long moment, his gaze steady and proud. Finally, he spoke. "You've done something extraordinary," he said, his deep voice carrying both strength and warmth. "Not because you fired them, not even because you bought that building, but because you stood tall when the world tried to make you small." She lowered her eyes for a moment, her fingers brushing the rim of her glass. "I wasn't sure if I went too far," she admitted softly. "Part of me worried I acted out of anger." He leaned forward, his tone firm yet gentle. "Anger can destroy, but righteous anger? That can shape history. What matters is what you built from it. And look at you. You turned humiliation into transformation." His words settled over her like a weight, but not a heavy one. It was the kind of weight that reminded her she wasn't just carrying her own name. She was carrying his and the countless sacrifices that had paved their path. "Dad," she whispered, "you fought so hard for this family's place in the world. I just didn't want them to think they could laugh at us, or anyone like us." He smiled, lines of both struggle and triumph etched across his face. "And that," he said, "is why I'm proud. You understand that our greatest wealth isn't the money in our accounts or the buildings with our name on them. It's the example we set. It's the courage we pass down. Legacy, my daughter, is measured by how many people find their strength because of you." Her throat tightened. She blinked back tears, realizing this was more than praise. It was a passing of the torch. "Do you really think I'm ready to carry that?" she asked quietly. Her father reached across the table, his hand firm as it closed over hers. "You already are. You proved it the moment you chose dignity over silence, justice over comfort. Remember, privilege without purpose is wasted, but privilege with vision, that's unstoppable." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full. Full of pride, of love, of unspoken promises. She saw in his eyes not just approval, but relief. relief that his daughter would not only inherit his empire, but his mission. For the first time since that humiliating laugh in the boutique, she felt no anger, only clarity. She lifted her chin, her voice steady. "Then I'll honor what you built, and I'll make sure our name means more than power. It will mean respect." Her father nodded, his smile slow and certain. "And that," he said, "is the true inheritance." As the city lights shimmered beyond the window, they sat together in quiet understanding. Father and daughter, bound not by fortune alone, but by fire, resilience, and the promise of change. And though the world would soon move on to its next headline, in that moment she knew her story was only beginning. The streets outside buzzed with their usual rhythm, but inside the boutique, silence carried its own power. Sunlight streamed through the glass walls, casting golden reflections across the polished marble floors. Where laughter and mockery once echoed, a new energy lingered, one of respect, transformation, and quiet strength. She stood near the front display, gazing at the freshly mounted sign above the entrance. Sleek, elegant, commanding. It wasn't just a nameplate. It was a statement. Her voice broke the silence, calm yet resolute. People think power is measured by money, by the cars you drive, by the buildings you own. She paused, her reflection catching in the glass, half shadow, half light. But real power, it's about something deeper. It's about dignity. It's about respect. And it's about reminding the world, sometimes gently, sometimes firmly, exactly who you are. She turned slowly, walking through the boutique's aisles. The same space where she had been belittled now stood as her own. Every step was deliberate, symbolic, as if she were reclaiming not just a store, but every voice ever silenced, every person ever underestimated. Yesterday, they saw me as just another customer they didn't think belonged here. Today, they answer to me. But this was never about revenge. Her words hung in the air, steady and thoughtful. This was about making a point, a lesson carved into marble and memory. Respect should never be optional. The camera of imagination lingered on her face, eyes strong, posture unshaken. She wasn't gloating. She wasn't cruel. She was centered, calm, carrying the kind of weight only those who have been tested truly understand. She stopped at the counter where she had once been mocked, her hand brushing across its surface. For a moment, her expression softened. I didn't do this for myself alone. I did it for anyone who has ever been told they weren't enough. For anyone who has been laughed at, dismissed, or underestimated. This boutique isn't just a business anymore. It's a reminder that no matter how the world tries to box you in, you can redefine the space. You can own the story. Her voice lowered, intimate now, as if speaking directly to the listener's heart. True power isn't loud. It isn't about flashing wealth or forcing fear. True power is quiet, undeniable, unshakable. True power is respect. And sometimes you have to remind the world who you are. She stepped outside, the camera following her as the boutique's new sign gleamed above the door. The city moved on around her, unaware that a revolution had just taken place behind those glass walls. With one last glance at the building, she allowed herself a small, knowing smile, not of triumph, but of purpose. Because this wasn't the end of her story, it was the beginning of something larger, an inheritance not of riches, but of responsibility. The screen fades on her silhouette against the city skyline, while her final words linger like a vow. Money fades, buildings crumble, but respect, that endures.